Well, welcome to session 6. To this point in our hiring quest, we have amassed an impressive pool of potential candidates for our open position. We've done so by using a complex array of recruiting methods, and we are poised to become the organizational hero for hiring the greatest employee in the history of the planet. We've looked all over the world for this superhero and even learned how to recruit proactively to ensure that we perpetuate the superhero lineage. Okay, so we are really poised to whittle down our large number of potential applicants to a manageable number, and ultimately we're going to hire a body to fill an opening. And if we're good, we may not hire a superhero, but a solid person who will contribute positively to our organization's endeavors. Oh, wait, not so fast. We've looked all over the world, but we have actually missed investigating one hidden area that has eluded us by being nearly invisible in its recruiting potential. We failed to look in our own backyard. Imagine that. What's the saying? If it was a snake, it would have bit us. That's right. There is a rich area of recruiting within arm's length should we choose to open our eyes and see it. It's called internal recruiting and internal and external referrals. I point out in the lecture that internal recruiting is based on the premise that if we have done an exceptional job of recruiting the best, why do we need to look outside these walls to fill our positions? Now, granted, we must look outside for some positions and skills, but why not at least start by looking inside? Why go outside and hire an expensive headhunter to tap into the employed labor pool when we have a bunch of free headhunters in our community who have lots of employed friends and neighbors and relatives and acquaintances? Internal recruiting and internal and external referrals have their own problems. They also have a lot of advantages, but they certainly offer positive benefits for our hiring quest. We will discuss these methods in greater detail and actually close out the discussion of recruiting methods. I'll also give you a real-life example of an internal recruiting process used at RCA Corporation and some other companies, and that was developed by a professional consulting firm called DDI, or Development Dimensions International. This example is somewhat complex, so you have to follow carefully, but was highly effective and not only improving our selection process, but also in improving our organization and the culture. We'll use this example of assessment centers to provide further examples in the next sessions when we discuss choosing assessment tools. Finally, the text offers 7 criticisms of assessments. The discussion is good, and I would advise you to read chapter 6 carefully. So sit back once again and enjoy a discussion of how to look in your own backyard for hidden treasure. One thing is for sure, if you don't consider the treasures in your own backyard and reward them with promotional and career opportunities, they will move to someone else's backyard. Don't let your neighbor or competitor dig your treasures out of your backyard. They're just there for the taking. Welcome to session 6. We're going to wrap up our lengthy discussion on recruiting methods. I realize that we expended much effort on recruiting methods, and perhaps that was unexpected for you. However, recruiting is extremely important to all organizations. Who can deny that in most businesses, people make the difference between success and failure? Any business that is willing to accept just anyone they can get their hands on is destined for failure. We must pick the best people. The first and most crucial step in picking the best people is recruiting the best people. Do we want to select the best of the best, or the best of the mediocre, or the best of the worst? I'll take my chances with option number 1, and I'm sure you would too. And any company who knows they have inferior people and are comfortable with that, well, you fill in the blanks. So if you are fortunate enough to work for one of those companies that know they have superior people, an interesting question arises. If superior people are here, why would we want to look elsewhere? Why not recruit from within? Of course, there are limitations to that since we need qualified people, but shouldn't we start by looking inside instead of extensive external searches? I am a strong believer in internal recruiting and filling positions as much as possible internally. That said, I also believe that filling all positions internally is wrong. I believe that one should recruit internally about 80% of the time and 20% of the time externally. Some people from the outside keep the organization from being stale. It brings in new blood. But for the most part, internal recruiting is healthy if you have good people. At Nestle, we recruited higher level hourly positions 100% internally. We had 3 levels of hourly positions. Level 1 was the lowest level, and level 3 being the highest level. All of the open positions in level 2 and level 3 were recruited internally, and that generally came from the lowest level, level 1. And all external recruiting filled all the open positions that were left over in level 1. The advantages of recruiting internally are obvious and are detailed in the website referrals that I've posted for your review under the Modules tab in Canvas. These websites also list some of the disadvantages as well. There are a few disadvantages that are not quite so clear, though, that I have seen throughout my career. First, in internal recruiting, the selection decision becomes critical. You see, when recruiting externally, all rejection decisions are communicated normally through a letter. External candidates who are rejected are sent on their way and will likely never be seen again. Internal rejection decisions are communicated face to face. You live with those rejected applicants every day. We in management may rationalize that the rejected internal applicants will understand why someone else was chosen over them. But remember, as we get higher in the organization, often the criteria for successful performance becomes softer and more subjective. We'll talk about that later. Can you really satisfactorily explain to someone that their drive or initiative or intelligence or communication skills are significantly less than someone else they often don't know very much about? When the final decision is made, there is often little empirical objective data available to differentiate between final applicants. There may be a difference, but it is difficult to convince someone who has been rejected from the career position of their dreams that they are not worthy. It's even harder to convince them that somebody else was more worthy. And it is next to impossible to convince a current employee that someone from the outside was more worthy. Especially when that employee's supervisor has been, and perhaps justifiably, been telling them over and over for months that they are truly exceptional employees. If you have one opening and 30 internal applicants, the end result may very well be one very happy person and 29 very angry persons. Internal recruiting requires a very clear policy that is followed to the letter. Everyone must understand the rules of eligibility, and the criteria for selection must be equally clear and understood. Otherwise, internal recruiting is ripe for charges of favoritism by employees, and outside interest groups such as unions and governmental agencies and attorneys all become a Twitter with anticipation of a large payday at your expense. Put another way, you can get sued, just like with outside candidates. Because of the difficulties of selection decisions and the potential for unrest, many companies use seniority as a prime selection tool. That is certainly the easy way out, and perhaps the most defensible, but by far it is the least productive for the company. As much as I am in favor of internal recruiting, I am equally negative on using seniority to make selections. It is a cop-out. Some of the same issues arise with internal referrals, but perhaps not to the same extent. If I refer someone it's probably because I have some kind of a relationship with that person and believe they will help the company. If that person is rejected, I may not like it, but I could probably live with the results. But if I believe that person did not get a fair hearing or consideration, I may become disengaged and negative. I realize that I'm using might and could a lot to describe these scenarios. However, they do happen, and I've experienced these situations. They happen frequently and are something that should be of concern to management as well. What we in management consider fair and reasonable is viewed very differently by other people. Encouraging referrals both inside and outside is a good practice and one that often bears fruit. And it goes along with my previous assertion to recruit always. Always seek referrals. And I've also included a couple of interesting websites on referrals, about 3 of them for you to look at. They have some really great information. Now, during my tenure with RCA, Nestle, and Noel Group, I've always been involved in my community. Employers or HR associations, Chamber of Commerce, economic development groups, etc., have received my attention and my time. As an HR professional, I firmly believe HR should be the face of the company in the community. Okay, I know what you're thinking. If Willie's face was the face to the community, the company could have done a lot better. Remember, think kind thoughts even about ugly faces. But it's true. Someone should be involved in the community, and it should be HR. Why do you ask HR? Because we have the most to gain in this involvement. Involvement builds our community brand for recruiting. Involvement in such groups helps us influence events in our community and direct those events. Involvement gives us a great opportunity to network and seek both good potential employees and solid referrals. I was never hesitant to stand up in a group and announce, we have an opening for an industrial engineer, or we have an opening for an accountant, or for 15 hourly employees, or for a maintenance mechanic. Please let me know if you know of someone who could fit these skills. I've had HR professionals tell me that they were expecting a layoff in 2 weeks and had some good people who would need jobs. I've had them say, I have a neighbor or a friend or a sister, etc., who has those skills. Referrals are part of recruiting always. And with the exception of the programs defined in our website references, it's virtually free. Obviously, I'm a fan of referrals and also of significant but not total internal recruiting. Let me give you a real-life example of such an internal recruiting endeavor with all of its detail and all of its complexities. And this program is not one that I implemented in just one organization, but in many organizations. It is a program that ensured the best selection decisions possible, but also brought many residual benefits that impacted the culture of the organizations positively. And with really well laid out programs, they all have residual benefits that you need to be aware of. This example will also provide a great reference point for our discussion in the next 2 sessions, where we marry the recruiting and assessment concepts we've been discussing all semester. We called this program simply the Assessment Centers. Let me explain. The Assessment Centers focused on recruiting and selecting for one position in the organization. The assessment centers pertain to only the first level supervisory positions within our manufacturing operations. That said, I should point out that I have seen and participated in assessment centers focused on sales positions, upper level management positions, call center operators, and many other jobs throughout many different organizations. The centers were developed by Development Dimensions International, a consulting group out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. DDI developed the centers, validated them to our jobs, and trained me to administer the programs throughout the RCA Corporation. Why do I mention this? Remember, I preached about getting professionals to help use assessment tools and to develop complex assessment tools. I practice what I preach. Not only would I have questionable expertise to develop such a program myself, I certainly would not have the objectivity. If the assessment tool runs into legal challenges, would I have credibility on the witness stand saying that I worked for the company and was totally objective in developing such a complex assessment tool? Would I have credibility on the witness stand when I pointed out that I had not actually developed such a complex program in the past, but I was sure my methodology was sound? Not likely. However, by enlisting DDI, who were considered experts in the field and had developed thousands of such programs, I could put them on the witness stand to testify that our selection tools were sound and non-discriminatory. The chances of winning such a case and avoiding costly penalties improved immensely. But as I recall, DDI did not work for free, so such consultation carries significant front-end expense. Is it worth it? Well, I'll let you judge that after you hear the complete story. This assessment program grew out of problems experienced at the RCA Final Assembly plant in Bloomington, Indiana. First problem was that we expected to hire or promote several new first-level supervisors in the near future. These openings were created due to the impending retirement of many supervisors and also business expansion, which would create new supervisory positions. The second problem was the recognition that our current supervisory staff was not proficient and would not likely meet our future needs. In other words, we needed to upgrade the proficiency and expertise of our supervisors throughout the facility. This facility had about 3,500 hourly employees, so the supervisory staff was very large. We also decided that we had untapped talent internally, so most openings would be filled from within. How would we select who would fill these positions? Do we do something new, or do we indulge in insanity and continue the same process hoping for better results? Based on the incompetence, and that was an apt phrase for a large number of our supervisors, based on the incompetence of our supervisory staff, our previous selection process was ineffective. You see, our old selection process largely consisted of managers, who used to be supervisors themselves, selecting the employee of their choice from their department to be a supervisor. If those managers were strong, we tended to get strong supervisors. If those managers were weak, we tended to get weak supervisors. And we had more weak managers than strong managers. Do you see a problem here? A general rule of thumb is that weak managers select more weak managers, weak engineers select equally weak engineers, weak thieves also choose weak thieves to be in their gang. No one wants to select people stronger than themselves. The problem of weak is that it perpetuates itself in the organization. The good old boy network was alive and well within the walls of the Bloomington facility. We needed something more effective and much more objective. The lesson is that bad selection processes don't stop with one selection. They tend to perpetuate themselves throughout the organization over time. So how will a selection process solve such a debilitating problem? A job analysis on the supervisor position was conducted by DDI, and they developed an assessment center based on the critical skills possessed by a successful supervisor for our organization. As I remember them, those skills consisted of oral communication skills, written communication skills, tolerance for stress, problem analysis, decisiveness, problem solving, leadership, interpersonal skills, and conflict management. Each of the skills included a detailed definition of what good looked like in that particular trait. DDI took this data and developed several simulation exercises which formed the framework of the Assessment Center program. DDI then conducted the initial training of people who would evaluate the potential candidates. They were called assessors. DDI also initially trained people to play specific roles in the Assessment Center exercises, or they were called role players. This initial process was time-consuming and expensive. After the first training program, of which I was the one being trained, DDI trained me to be an assessor trainer. At that point, DDI assumed the role of advisors and only participated in the process to do an occasional audit and to help with specific questions. Although the initial investment was large, the ongoing expenses were reduced by our own in-house control. The program to train the assessors took 3 or 4 days, so after the initial investment, we were still faced with significant time investment. And we trained about 25 assessors in that facility. The assessment center consisted of 4 exercises that simulated situations that a first-level supervisor may encounter on the job and also included a structured interview. The exercises also presented several opportunities to observe behaviors, also identified by DDI, depicting the critical behaviors outlined above and related to the skills necessary to be successful in the job. The simulation exercises included an in-basket simulation in which the participant had 1 hour in which to address several problems and situations that were present in a normal supervisor's in-basket. A role-play simulation in which the participant acting as a supervisor had to tell an employee, played by the role player, that the employee was not performing up to expectations. A role-play simulation in which the participant acting as a supervisor had to tell an employee, played by a trained role player, that the employee didn't receive an expected promotion. And finally, a written scheduling exercise in which the participant had to schedule a production line with numerous unforeseen problems such as absenteeism, production, schedule changes, etc. Each assessment center was conducted off-site at a nearby hotel or similar facility and was conducted over a 2-day period. Each simulation exercise described above was observed and scored by the trained assessor, and each participant was seen by at least 3 different trained assessors during the center. Each 2-day assessment center program included 12 participants, and in total, we put nearly 200 candidates through these assessment centers. As you can see, the assessment center program was a real commitment in time and money to improve the competence of our first-level supervisors. And the program traversed several years in time, not just one session, to assess, select, and train as many people as possible in the supervisory trade. The candidates who became assessment center participants were chosen in a rather unusual manner. There was great concern that managers would choose their favorite employees to participate just like before, and others would be overlooked. Employees were very suspicious that the selecting of employees to participate would not be fair, and everyone would not have an equal opportunity to compete for the sought-after supervisory positions. Therefore, we conducted several, I believe it was 3 or 4, 1/2-day Saturday sessions, unpaid, in which we gave an orientation to the assessment center program and to the responsibilities of a supervisor position, which allowed interested employees to choose if they wanted to participate in the center or not. If they opted out, they would not be eligible to compete for any open supervisory position. At the end of the orientation, employees who were still interested were allowed to complete an application for the supervisory job and submit it to HR. Those applications were then entered into a pool of applicants, and names were drawn randomly from that pool participation. I should point out that all open positions were filled from those employees who had successfully completed the assessment center program and were determined qualified to immediately assume the role of a supervisor. No one would move into any supervisory position without successfully completing the assessment center program in manufacturing. This addressed the, quote, good old boy network that plagued the credibility of management in the past. And our goal was to maintain a pool of ready candidates to fill our open positions as they became available. Once randomly selected, Employees were assigned a date to report to the assessment center site, and they were paid for their participation. They were told that they would be excused from work for 2 days, each day lasting approximately 7 to 8 hours. After completing the 2-day program, employees were sent home, and the assessors met and evaluated the performance of each employee and determined if they were qualified to move into the supervisory position. If so, the employee was placed in the pool to await the next opening. The manager of the open position could then choose to interview anyone or as many qualified employees as they wished from that pool and select one for the position. If employees were not considered immediately qualified, the areas where they were deficient were identified and documented. All participants, successful or not, received direct feedback about the details of their performance and the options to address the deficiencies. To summarize that, the following process summarizes the assessment center. Employees express their interest in being considered for supervisory positions, in other words, attending the assessment center, and they express this interest by attending the non-paid orientation and completing an application. 12 employees were randomly selected to attend the center. It was a 2-day program and scheduled. The 2-day program was scheduled and assessments were conducted during the program. Feedback was given to each applicant or participant. The pool of qualified candidates was created. When an opening existed, qualified candidates were interviewed by the manager, and one candidate from the pool was offered the supervisory job. The results of this process were indeed impressive. All seemed to agree that the quality of our supervisors greatly improved. Our old supervisory ranks were largely filled with white males due to the good old boy network mentioned previously. The Assessment Center program yielded as many qualified females and minorities as white males, and a significant number of those diverse candidates were selected to be supervisors. Thus, the quality of the supervisors improved, as well as the diversity within the supervisory ranks. In addition, RCA Bloomington was highly unionized, and the Assessment Center program provided the process in which selections could be made in a fair manner that was defensible to the union and governmental agencies. An unforeseen benefit was that all employees came to better understand the responsibilities and difficulties of the supervisory position due to the orientation and the participants gaining firsthand experience through the simulation exercises. The word spread widely that the supervisory job was hard, and everyone understood the position a lot better. From my perspective, the best result was that the good old boy network was destroyed. The perpetuation of weak was over. The process worked so well that I implemented it in another RCA facility. It proved equally effective in all of those facilities as well. Relating to Chapter 6 in the text, this case also illustrates another point related to the weaknesses of assessment tools. The initial perception as to the validity of assessment tools is listed among those weaknesses. In the RCA case, there was great skepticism surrounding the use of the assessment center and the initial expense of that program. However, the tool was developed with the help of a very professional partner, DDI, and the first few centers yielded very strong results. Skepticism and doubt disappeared, and managers, executives, and employees rapidly accepted the Assessment Center program as the best way to select new supervisors. The program gained great credibility in the organization. Now, technical positions such as maintenance supervisors were exempted from the rule that all new supervisors must complete the Assessment Center successfully. This exception was established due to the technical requirements of the maintenance position and the fact that maintenance personnel were in very short supply in the labor market. After the first few assessment center sessions and observing the first-hand competence of the new supervisors, the maintenance managers requested that all maintenance supervisors also be required to successfully complete the assessment center program before being put into the job. That was when I knew we had successfully answered our critics. Sometimes the effectiveness of assessment tools must be proven, but the only way they can be proven is if they are developed and implemented effectively. Thus, this example represents a very complex internal selection assessment tool that overcame the perceived weaknesses and significantly changed the substance and the face of management in a very large company. I believe in the assessment tools. I've seen them work. I've seen them effectively change a culture dramatically in a rather short time. Now, speaking of Chapter 6, the text explores assessments in terms of common criticisms. They specifically look at 7 criticisms. Assessments are not very accurate. Assessments can be faked by applicants. Assessments are not worth the cost required to use them. Assessments pose a legal risk. Assessments are an unfair way to evaluate people. And assessments are offensive to candidates. And finally, assessments add too much time to the hiring process. Now, all of these are very fair criticism and are certainly true in some instances. However, the above example of assessment centers was plagued by most of these perceived criticisms initially, but overcame them in a very short time. My assessment centers initially were feared to be inaccurate, but assurances of and the professionalism of DDI convinced most that it was at least worth a trial. It was difficult to fake these assessments in that they were conducted over a 2-day period and required verbal responses, written responses, and participation in simulations. The criticism of not worth the cost and time were of great concern, but our positive experiences soon convinced most that the price was high, but the results were exceptional, and therefore worth the expenditure. The question of fairness was handled procedurally in how the program was administered to assure fairness, and that it was vastly more fair than the good old boy network. We actually had more legal risk in our old system than we did with the assessment center, and the little risk that was present was mitigated by the presence of DDI and professional assistance. And finally, assessment centers were not offensive to candidates in that most of them actually enjoyed the 2 days of exercise simulations. The text does a good job on discussing criticisms, so I won't be redundant here, but you can see how these criticisms play out in the real assessment program and how they can be overcome. So the bottom line is that assessments done well with proper investment of 3 critical components, money, time, and expertise, can significantly change an organization for the better. Assessment tools done hastily or without proper expertise can, if you're lucky, do nothing, but if you're not lucky, can cause tremendous harm to the organization. And in business, don't we have enough people helping us fail, such as competitors and court rulings and others, without contributing to our own demise with critical processes that are based on guesses rather than solid data and fact? So we have now reviewed many different methods of amassing an impressive pool of magnificent candidates for our open positions. Internal selection processes can be as complex and sometimes even more complex than external methods, but they also have great value. Remember, if we have truly amassed quality within our own walls, why should we look outside those walls? To this point, we have even engaged in a little screening. We just can't help ourselves by doing that, and we've to this point ranked the candidates into piles of great, good, not so good, and why in the world did we keep this resume? Hopefully the last category is fairly small. But we have not likely applied many assessment tools to whittle the group down further. The next step is to get the group down to a manageable group of semifinalists, and that's what I was doing with the assessment center. So how do we go about making that final decision? Who makes that final decision? And what do we do after that decision is made? That's next in sessions 7 and 8.